I was born in South Korea and adopted as an infant. My parents are both white. My father was actually a Dutch immigrant who immigrated when he was 11. I have another sister who was adopted, and then I have three siblings who are biologically born to my parents. This is, I think, my 23rd year teaching. I've spent it both in special education and the classroom, all primary or elementary. I started out teaching in Michigan. I've lived in Guatemala, Istanbul, Paris, and now I'm back in Chicago teaching in a K through 8 independent school.
Thanks, Natasha. Rebecca?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rebecca Adamick. I'm also a transracial adoptee from South Korea. I was adopted when I was 4 months old, and I grew up in a family of 4 kids. My younger sister, who was a year younger than me, she was also adopted from South Korea. And I have 2 non-adopted siblings who are biologically my parents' children. I've worked in schools around the same time as a similar amount of time as Natasha. I started working in New York City public schools. I spent a lot of time there, mostly in Title I schools. I also taught in an international school in London. And I'm currently actually a middle school principal in Brazil right now. So also at an American international school.
Thank you. So we're an international crew for sure, in more ways than one. Derek, I'm just going around my screen.
Hi, all. My name is Derek Carlson, he, him. I am transracial adoptee as well. I'm born in Evanston, grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so you'll hear the y'alls, but I am so excited to be here. This is going to be my 12th year of teaching. I've taught in the Chicago area the entire time, and I'm really excited to get into this very important work and talking about cognitive structures and how we can best support our most vulnerable students.
Thanks, Derek. And Anna and Gail has made it in, so we'll go Anna and then Gail.
Hi, I'm Anna Allenbrook, and I was born back in the 50s in London, England, adopted when I was 2 months old to a same race, same religion, family. I'm the oldest of four. I have three siblings who came after me who are biological to my parents. So after adopting me, they were able to have kids. I am a retired educator. I worked in the New York City public schools from the 80s until 2000. Where are we? 2021. And I was a principal from 1997 to 2021 of a public school in Brooklyn called the Brooklyn New School. And and this topic is dear to my heart.
Thank you. And Gail, you made it.
I made it. I clicked on the link that I used to register for this instead of the other ones, and somehow that was magic. So hello, everyone. Well, thank you for welcoming me in late. I'm Gail Jessett. I am an adoptee. I was adopted in the 60s when it was a pretty secretive thing to do. And so that was definitely influential in my identification as an adopted person. I'm a lifelong educator. I've been in education for 38 years in multiple roles: classroom teacher, instructional coach, mentor, education professor, and a reading specialist. And I am currently living in Milwaukee, and I am a dean of academics at a public charter school.
Well, thank you all. First question, and again, let's go Natasha, and we'll keep going around the screen. First question, and just looking at folks in the chat, we have a lot of people wearing multiple hats. So parents / educator, adoptee / interested person. So we have the range of everyone here who connects to schools, and as we know, everyone has some connection or memory of schools. But the first question, because you are such a special kind of precious group, how has your experience as an adoptee influenced how you show up as a teacher? Natasha, you want to start?
Sure. I think I was not, as I started to teach, really very intentional about sharing that part of my identity. And then as I came to see students who had that shared piece, or maybe had a different family structure, that it was really important to kind of be more vulnerable, which was hard for me at first, but to allow that piece of who I am and my story of my family to become a really large part of like my identity, and sharing that with students, I thought was a way to kind of create community. As I've progressed as an educator, I've tried to get more involved with things. We do affinity groups at our school, and so I've taken part in leading an affinity group for adoptees, and I felt that that's a good way for students within our community to see a mirror and maybe have someone that they can relate to and have a connection with.
And let's, I know at least 3 of you have done or led affinity groups, so let's define affinity groups for everyone. Maybe you want to, yeah, Natasha, you want to, yeah.
So we have affinity and alliance groups. So affinity would be like a shared affinity, a piece of an identity. So for me, I lead an adoptees affinity group. It was facilitated in the past by someone who had like a social work background, but didn't necessarily share that affinity. So it wasn't a true affinity space, although there was a space for students who identified that way to be together in community. For us, it's kind of more of a time that's led by for me, it's more of a time that's led by the students, defined by what they need. We have some set norms about, you know, sharing stories within a space and not sharing out other people's stories, but it's more meant to be a time to facilitate togetherness and create a sense of belonging for students and other faculty members who might share that affinity.
Thanks. Rebecca, same question. How's your experience as an adoptee shaped how you showed up or influenced how you showed up as a teacher?
Yeah, I think kind of similar to what Natasha was sharing. I think relationships have been really important in the classroom. And so just acknowledging that there are so many different types of people and families that exist. I think this came through the most for me in terms of literature that was read in the classroom and just storytelling and kids being able to share their stories, and no one was validated more than another, or I hope so. But just making a lot of space for having multiple stories to be heard, multiple perspectives be heard. And I think, you know, kids would often ask me like, well, you were born in Korea, so like, tell us all about Korea. And so it was a really great opportunity to talk about my story as an adoptee, and then like show them a picture of my family. And it's like, you know, have you ever seen a family like this? And I think when, you know, kids are naturally curious, but they're also just, you know, when they learn that really young, they take that with them, and they're like, you know, they see another adoptee and they can be like, I've already heard about adoption before. So I think just making that space in the classroom for a lot of stories and conversation with one another.
Thanks. Anna.
Yeah, I think that Rebecca said that key word relationship. And one of the things I reflect on is that when I first started teaching, which is a long time ago, I don't think I thought of my adoptee status as significant in any way. But one thing about the way I always taught, I really put on being an adopted person, and that is as an adopted person, I consider myself pretty hypervigilant, and I'm always kind of paying attention. I know who's in the room, what's going on. And as a teacher, that actually was not a bad quality. I really knew my students. I wanted to know my students. Who are they? What were their stories? So creating what I like to think of as an inviting space. And I think that's how I started. It was only as I got older that I realized that that adoption was a big piece of both my identity, and in the school that I worked in for many years, many of our students, because we happen to have a lot of kids, a significant number of kids who were adopted in the school. So reaching out and being available and being open, not too open, but sharing my story when it was necessary or needed, so that there was another perspective out there. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks. Gail.
I had never thought about this question. I met Max a few years ago, and he was telling me about his work, and he asked me that question, and I'm still perplexed by the question, and I've been pondering it for a couple of years now, Max, because I can't separate what I would have been like as an educator had I not been adopted. So it's hard for me to parcel it out. And also because I was conditioned to not identify with my adopted status. I was conditioned to, because of the time in which I was adopted, I was conditioned to act like that didn't happen. So my awareness of how it's impacted me really came about, Max, 2 years ago when you asked me that question. Anna identified hypervigilance. I believe that exists in me too. I think if you're an adopted child, you're always reading the room to make sure that you're okay and you're safe and you're not going to be going away. Have always been a very high performer, and that seems like a good byproduct, but I think part of that high performing is also trying to, make sure that I'm accepted. And I've always been very attracted to helping students who are marginalized or who are not, typical. And I wonder if that's because I secretly, even though I wasn't supposed to, saw myself in that way growing up. And then I think Rebecca also mentioned relationships. Connecting to people has always been very important to me. And I do think that is because of attachment, perhaps. And so I've always been a very strong educator as far as connecting with students and the parents of my students. But I'm going to keep thinking of that question, Max. I still don't think I have the answer.
Well, I mean, the truth is, and I think I said this before you were on, but all 5 of you, I've seen all 5 of you in practice, actual practice, and there's something special. And I think when we met, I talked about it as the sensitivity gene, which when Anna says hypervigilance, it makes sense. But all of you, I've watched turn towards kids that many adults will turn away from. And I don't like saying that as an educator, because we all get in the profession to support all kids, but everyone, we're all human too. So we all have the point where we just don't know what to do with different behaviors or how they're manifesting. But all of you, I've watched walk towards children who, adopted or not, looked after or not, really, really, really are asking for deeper relationships. So I saw that in you, Gail, and yeah, I mean, we're all trying to figure it all out still, I think too. So, Derek.
I mean, y'all all really said it. I think for me, it was really important with my pattern recognition skills and being able to interweave different stories and narratives into the content. And being able to look at all the assets and all this rich, beautiful, diverse tapestry that we have, and being able to really lift up everyone and doing it in a way that becomes authentic and just kind of matter of fact of how we exist. That's been very important for me and my rapport building and being able to connect with students. I think that being able to have the mirror and then everyone can see that. I mean, windows, mirrors, sliding doors, everyone gets to learn about each other. And I think that that's very important for my practice. I do love I love the content piece, but you have to have the trust and the rapport. And studies show that students are more likely to take academic risk. They're more likely to feel comfortable in this space if you honor their identity. And then you do that, then they trust you, you can get into the learning pit. And then a lot of really great work happens when they start to take on more of the ownership. And it's their journey, being able to witness and not put any type of, you know, ownership onto them for where they are. They are where they are. And so it's not, you can't love someone out of their journey. And so that for me has been really important with honoring their journey in the classroom and just pattern recognition to see, I see where you are. I will help support as best as possible, but I'm not going to stigmatize your journey because I want to love you into a different place. You can't love someone out of a shadow. And I want to honor everyone's journey, and I hope that made sense. It made sense in my head.
Yeah. And one thing I meant to say in the introduction was what I found as an adoptive parent was I was being thrown a lot of material through adoption training or getting certified to adopt or foster. that told me what I should do to advocate for my kids in schools. And then sometimes I would get to the school and the school would say, okay, great, we get it. And it took me a while to realize maybe they didn't get what I was talking about, or maybe they just didn't have the people or the capacity to go into deeper learning about adoption or a different version of adoption than they grew up with. And so that's why I think a lot of parents relate to that. Like, I can Google right now, give me 10 tips, 10 things I should do as a parent of an adopted kid, and it'll tell me, buy books for the classroom, share with the teacher, let your kid come to you with their issues. Don't steamroll the teacher with adoptee issues before your child presents them. But one thing I always wished was like, but couldn't the system know better? Like couldn't we be affirming from the get-go? And so I know some of your schools, I know Anna's school, just having, I remember you telling the story, just having on the intake form, was your family created through adoption? Or did your family, you phrase it even smoother than that?
Yeah, I don't think we focus on adoption, but just tell us your story
Yeah.
of how this. Yeah, yeah. I have to be very careful how you word it. I can't remember the exact wording, but something that opens up that answer.
So just those things, those things which could seem little can be just welcoming gestures to families who aren't sure what's awaiting them in the classroom. We're going to start kind of I'm going to throw questions to just one of you, and then we'll keep going. But everyone who's on the panel can feel free to keep adding. But Rebecca, I thought I'd start with one question, especially because you worked in so many different contexts. How do you navigate talking or not talking about your adoption with colleagues, students, or families?
That's a great question. I think it really depends on the school. So a lot of schools where I was in, particularly in New York, in the public charter space, we did a lot of teacher pre-work, leadership pre-work. A lot of it was just relationship building. And I think that my identity as an adoptee often came up, before we were starting with kids, which was great because it was an opportunity for people to really get to know me as an adoptee. And me in my full self. I think with families, it really depends. I'm going to give you an example. My last school, we had a family who had a looked after student in their care. And she had started having really difficult time at school. The family was really having a hard time. And actually my parents visited that day and met the family, and they actually had this beautiful conversation about adoption and foster care. They had been foster parents themselves. And we were very, after that point, we were very open. I was very open with that family about my experience as an adoptee, my experience that didn't match up to their experiences. But just knowing that, we were in this together, and that was a perspective that I was bringing to support their child through school every single day. This year, I had another family, transracial adoption, three children who were 11, 12, and 8. I did not share right from the beginning that I was an adoptee. The family had quite a bit of things going on. I would say they were overwhelmed in the most beautiful way, but they were overwhelmed. And it wasn't about until halfway through the year that I shared that I was an adoptee. I didn't think it was the right time. And we hadn't really had that relationship yet, but some things happened at school. And I think it was an opportunity to build more trust with them, to share that piece about myself. So two very different situations, and two different ways in which I approach telling my story as an adoptee. So I think it really depends on the family of the situation.
Thanks. Anyone want to add on?
Well, I noticed an interesting question. I think it was Janice asked, how are adoptees identified in school systems? And I'm sure it probably varies from system to system, but I've worked in quite a few systems, and there isn't, as far as I'm aware, a way of doing that. It's usually just disclosure by the family or the child. Would you all agree with that in your experience?
There's also I'm going to call it the Kathy Adamick version, my mom's version, which is just show up to school and tell everyone that your children are adopted. So yes, disclosure, for sure.
We also have on our intake forms, you know, families can choose to fill out as much information as they want, but I do believe there is like the language of adoption woven into like, what is your family structure like? Trying to encourage for information about that. So I think that it's up, again, it's up to families to fill out.
Awesome. We're jumping around, but yes, keep questions that you're thinking of coming. And I'm going to ask you a question, and everyone needs to see and understand the beauty of Brooklyn New School to think of this. We'll come, Janice, I see your question. We'll come back to it in a second. But Anna, the question of what do you wish school leaders understood about adoption-related trauma or about identity related to relinquishment or adoption or fostering?
I guess it's an interesting question because you said about adoption related trauma. And I think that's the first thing. I think most school leaders do not have any clue that there is adoption related trauma. So I think just a little bit more knowledge about what it is, what it means to be adopted. And I think, frankly, I think most school leaders have no idea. So I think having that information that it is a trauma to lose your first family and that it will manifest itself in some kind of way, whether it's the hypervigilant kid, the super quiet kid, the acting out kid, it doesn't matter. How the child responds to that identity, to that loss, will be different for each child. But knowing that there was a loss and that the child is processing that in some way, I think is extremely important. And I don't think that's understood yet. And I'm not just school leaders, teachers too. A lot of teachers have no clue. And then you see adopted children getting labeled with all these other things that they have. It's as opposed to they're just really just sharing a little bit about their feelings. So they get I think adopted children, a high percent of adopted children are have an IEP for some kind of learning disability. And I'm not saying they don't have a learning disability, but there's a lack of understanding of what that's all about.
So I don't know if anyone wants to add on, but one of the things that comes up is, like Anna said, so kids who are adopted or in foster care, a lot of them disproportionately end up in, yes, special education, which, right, maybe, yes, absolutely, maybe they need it. There are real differences and disabilities, but in the school system, that's another marker of difference. So the impact can be, I already felt different. I was already hypervigilant, and now I'm navigating getting pulled out of class, having 2 teachers swarm me in the middle of class or 1 or 2 teachers around me all the time. And that journey that some people have already named can really, really, really be interrupted or disrupted, and a child can become problematized. And then sometimes, not with all kids, we start to see big behaviors where kids really don't feel like they fit in school. So,
or the opposite, very well behaved, sort of invisible, the silent kid who literally is unknown, not known in the classroom. I think that's really common with children who are adopted.
Anyone want to say more, add on? I see heads nodding.
I think this gets to when we're looking at how do we integrate even SEL and mindfulness just across the board when it comes to the adults who are going to be part of the classroom community and how students can self-regulate regardless of what content and what subject it is. It's all interconnected. And you go through Maslow and Bloom's taxonomy, they always say the same thing. It's like you have to have you have to be centered. You have to feel calm in this space. You have to feel like you are protected in that space, that you belong. And so one part have to give the autonomy within the space for folks to execute with, informed instruction. So they're not, inadvertently causing harm, but we need to be able to, you know, if we need to pause in this, 15-minute mini lesson so we can address this and then we can do the repair, heal together, and then move forward, you know, that all has to be really well lifted. And I don't know if, all the training, we have to start looking at some of these organizations to that, do the SEL work. And is this SEL work that is just personality, character trait based, or is it something that's actually truly training our students and our professionals to truly navigate these complex topics? And, all the stuff that they see out in the world, media literacy. I mean, I'm not the expert about things, but I personally, what I pattern recognition I see online, a lot of the kids can read. They just don't have like the critical literacy to like parse through certain things. So we have to be able to teach them how to really lift it themselves and have that critical eye and that not hyper awareness, because we don't want hypervigilance as a trauma response, but we want them to be able to be empowered to navigate it on their own.
Thanks. And as we're talking, I don't know if we're going to get to kind of isolate this, but well, just want to make sure everyone who's not an educator in the room knows social emotional learning is what is getting talked about here. So SEL is sort of the abbreviation for that, and there's been a lot invested in it recently, and so that's what Derek's kind of addressing. And also, we can't overlook the intersections of everything that shows up in American classrooms. So we're talking about issues around race, issues around gender identity, socioeconomics. We have represented here the types of schools that we're in, so private, charter, public, where you go to school, the type of school you go to can definitely influence kind of how your education has been dictated from who's ever governing your school experience too. I'm just going to answer Janice's question, and anyone can kind of correct me here. Janice just asked, going back before, is the trend of adoptive parents to disclose this? I will say, as someone who's worked in like relatively more so-called self-proclaimed like progressive places where adoption is celebrated a little bit more, yes, my experience in the past 25 years, so in an era of openness, many adoptive parents have been more open. I think then, I don't know what your all experience was, but there are still some parents who want it to remain underground as much as possible. Do some of you still face that?
Yes, definitely. There are some parents who don't really think it's nobody's business. And then there are parents who say, yes, my child's adopted, but they don't want it spoken about.
I've found too, it depends on the age of the students. I had some families this year that were in early childhood and they just said, we're not ready to talk about it with our child, so we don't really want that published about our family's story. When we're ready to share that out, we will share that out. But I've also worked in a lot of independent or private schools too, where there is more celebration around it. So most parents in my experience have been more open, but there's been a few that haven't. And then there's families that just aren't ready yet because of the age of their child.
So let's talk a little bit. I think it's out there, but one of the questions from Katya is sort of what are effective practices? So like, what's the best way to support adoptees in the school system, and like, what are powerful practices? I used to sometimes when I present, I always like my first slide is like the secret is this is just about good teaching in general. So I think we can combine. So like, what do you wish you had? And what do you make sure all kids get when you think about adoptees or kids who have been in care in your space? Gail, do you want to start that one?
Sure. I'm glad you teed it up that way, Max, because when I considered this question before, I thought, well, I think it's good teaching around trauma-informed practices and identity safe spaces and a focus on social emotional learning, which, like Derek said, it goes beyond just character traits and things of that nature, but really is identity specific. But for those who are non-educators in this group today, some of those things I think about my own practice as a classroom teacher. When I became more informed, I made sure I started and I ended my days much differently than I had prior. For example, when kids would enter into the classroom, there were preferential choices that they could make, things they like to do that really didn't require a lot of emotional or intellectual juice, because they may have come from a troubling situation that morning, or they may have been very emotional about something that had happened. And so I would be playing quiet music. They would have a choice of 4 things they could do. It might be play with blocks or draw or talk with a friend in the corner, just something really lovely and quiet and welcoming and soft and nurturing. And then I did that for about 15 to 20 minutes. And during that time, I went in and I checked with every child. How are you doing today? Is there anything you want to tell me? Everything good? Or anything exciting happening? So I just made sure I made eye contact. I smiled at them. I let them know that I see that they're there. And if there was anything they wanted to share, they had a safe space to do that. And so that's just an example of what we might call a trauma-informed practice, or something that creates a chance for a student to share themselves and make their identity known. And then I did something similar at the end of the day, so that we ended our day in a very decompressed way, in a gentle way, in a connected way.
I love that practice at the end of the day and at the beginning of the day as well. At the end of the day, we do a sunset circle and we stand in our circle, we get to give shout outs, we get to, if we have any apologies that we need to do so that they don't hold on to something and take it home. And we honor that. We talk about how big and brave it is to be able to honor that with each other. If they need to do like a one-on-one apology, they can do that, but it's really to just make sure that we are not carrying things with us throughout the rest of the day, because every moment's precious. We don't want to re-litigate something, and every moment we can go up. And so we do that at the end of the day to have a strong close for the day.
I would share something I've started in elementary school and I moved to middle school. So I think elementary definitely looked a lot, a morning meeting, and then arrival is super important. So as a principal of an elementary school, I was at the door every single day with my dean of students, with my assistant principal, and we had eyes on every child, just how they were coming into the school building, what they were upset about, what they were happy about, like getting to have, conversation with them. So you get to know the kids really well and families really well. And then for middle school, we talk a lot about every child having a trusted adult. So that could be their science teacher, that could be their coach. But that is the person that we know that they can go to and that knows them very well. It's not necessarily me. I can't do it for every student necessarily, but every child, we meet around that in student teams around just who is supporting this student if things are coming up. And I think I would also come back to, I think something that Gal said about trauma-informed practices. I think it's really important to name for teachers and anybody working in a school that adoption can be traumatic. I don't think a lot of people think of adoption as having a traumatic layer to it, but knowing, I think trauma-informed practices now are much more common in schools than when I first started. But actually naming that adoption can look, that can look a certain way for different kids.
Anna, I'm going to ask you about bike riding, swimming, and gardening.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of things that a good school does is inviting, right? And so at Brooklyn New School, we teach bike riding, swimming, and gardening, for example. And those are just good examples. I don't know when, but quite a few years ago when New York City decided that we had too many kids who didn't learn how to swim, there was an initiative in New York to teach all our second graders to swim. It hasn't gotten off the ground, it's come back, but at our school, we've been doing it now for, I don't know, 15 plus, over 15, maybe 20 years of kids, all second graders learning to swim. And during the pandemic, when it was very difficult and that hybrid year that we had, I guess that was 2020 to 2021, I was able to start a biking program at the school. It's something that's always been dear to my heart. And so we had kids in small groups, and we needed something, we needed to make it a place you'd want to be, a place to come in. And so we went out, and a surprising number of New York City children do not know how to ride bikes. So teaching bike riding also at age 7, it's a good age to do it if they haven't learned. And we happen to also in Brooklyn have a farm where our kids, our first graders, are the farmers. But all of that's good for all kids. But I do think practice like that, it's the arts also, let's not forget the arts and music, the sciences, that engages, pull kids in, that's good for all kids. And it's especially good for our children, because it's a way of having children, again, feel known, feel loved, feel included. And I think that's a big part of all of those programs.
Can I share something else you taught me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember asking, I got to visit Anna's school, and I remember asking, so like, what does this have? It was amazing. I was a principal. I wanted to copy those practices, and yes, all of the arts focus. But I asked you, Anna, what does this have to do with adopted kids? And you talked about freedom and agency, like adoptees who often feel like part of their journey is, I'm kind of, and I'm paraphrasing it, way oversimplifying. This is the non-adoptee in me. I'm kind of on my own here. Like, I got 2 families. I've got to be the one who navigates it. But you talked about swimming and bike riding and gardening as these are part of my freedom. This is in me, and I can feel independent and a big sense of agency when I can do these things, which is awesome.
Right. And I think a sense of agency is great for adopted people, but it's also great for all of us, which is why I think, again, good practice is good practice.
Yes. Okay, so I'm looking at the time. Keep adding questions. We'll stop. We'll take off the spotlights and do more of a Q&A or just a discussion format. But I had a question teed up for Natasha. We've touched on this, but how can schools partner more effectively with adoptive and fostering families? Like even more than the forms that we talked about, like what are those effective practices look like?
Well, I think we've all kind of hit on how important it is to establish relationships, not just with the child, but with the families, so they can feel a sense of belonging within their community. So it's spending the time to get to know them, welcoming them into the community, having them share things that might be important to them, for us as teachers to know, or for administration, or for the larger community to be aware of. I know we've done some fostering of like parent relationships through school, in affinity spaces as well, where there's been a chance for other like adoptive parents to be able to meet together, and that's kind of been facilitated by our DEI director. And I feel like that's been a helpful way to have a group that's sacred, like that's special to the identity they hold, and be a way to see other community members that also have that shared thing. Yeah, I think there's definitely more that schools could be doing, but I feel like there's been a shift, as we've all talked about, on more social emotional development and seeing that as a need for the kids. So I think with that becomes more openness within schools to think about less traditional methods, and with that becomes more openness towards families, and hopefully creating a sense of belonging and inclusive spaces for all children, adoptees and not, that are more accepting.
Awesome. Anyone else? Okay, let's open it up. While I'm taking the spotlights off, I missed a question. Can someone just explain a little bit more what hypervigilance might look like from a child in a classroom? And like, we know things can look different at different ages. So just as you describe it, share what age you might imagine it, how it might look at different ages.
Well, I guess a little kid is always going to check, am I doing it right? They'd be less likely to just start doing it. They might watch, wait, see what the other kids are doing, and then do the work. So that kind of, and I think it was Gail who said, reading the room. What are we doing now? Always checking everyone out. The eyes are big, wide eyes, you know, really paying attention, but not necessarily to the teacher, but to the atmosphere, to the peers, to everything going on, super knowing, and knowing that, oh, someone just came in the room, that kind of thing. So, and I think you see it even in the little ones. You see it from in our school, the youngest are 4. So from 4 with the 4-year-olds all the way. I can think of one 4-year-old who never chose her own play. And it's just one kid, and they're not all like this, but she would always check, see what someone else was doing, and then do what that kid was doing. So that's just one example of a hypervigilant 4-year-old.
Anna, I think that's